Breaking news this hour, the Trump administration is refusing to rule out an attempt to muzzle James Comey. This as anticipation builds for sensational public testimony by the fired FBI director 6 days from now. White House officials say Mr. Trump will review a possible effort to invoke executive privilege. Tonight, a Senate Democratic source is driving home the difficulty of doing that, telling CNN the only way Mr. Trump might stop Comey would be to launch an unprecedented and politically risky court battle, and even that might not work. Also tonight, the White House is reaffirming that the president still has confidence in his son-in-law and senior advisor, Jared Kushner. But new questions keep arising about Kushner's Russia contacts and conflicting explanations about why he met with a banker linked to the Kremlin. President Vladimir Putin is weighing in on the Russia investigation tonight, dismissing it as hysteria. In new public remarks, Putin denies any secret backroom deals with the Trump team on lifting sanctions on Russia or anything else. Also breaking, the White House still won't say if Mr. Trump believes climate change is a hoax a day after his decision to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement. Multiple officials were asked multiple times, but still no answer. I'll talk about all of that much more with Senator Ed Markey. He's a Democrat on the Foreign Relations Committee. And our correspondents and specialists are also standing by. But first, let's go to our Justice correspondent, Jessica Schneider. Jessica, the White House now leaving the door open to invoking what's called executive privilege, but we're hearing more about what an uphill fight that could be.
That's right, Wolf. A Senate source says if President Trump wants to block Comey's testimony, he may have to take the fight all the way to federal court and seek a restraining order, something that has never been attempted before. Even if the president doesn't take it that far, the Senate source says Comey's private citizen status plus the president's statements make it all the more likely that Comey will, in fact, testify. Tonight, the White House is weighing whether to assert executive privilege to block FBI Director James Comey's testimony Thursday.
Literally, my understanding is the date for that hearing was just set. I have not spoken to counsel yet. I don't know how they're gonna respond.
Counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, indicated she expects Comey to talk, but sent mixed messages when asked.
We'll be watching with the rest of the world when Director Comey testifies by hundreds of thousands.
So the president's not going to invoke executive privilege?
The president will make that decision.
Comey no longer works for the government, so the president can't order him to stay silent. And some say President Trump's tweets about Comey and declarations like these.
We had a very nice dinner, and at that time he told me, you are not under investigation, which I knew anyway.
Waive the president's right. Others argue asserting executive privilege is necessary.
It sets a dangerous precedent that the president's conversations, private conversations can be revealed. It will be a he said type of thing. It is one side of the story. I don't think that helps the process.
And there's new insight tonight into how James Comey might recount his conversations with the president. A source with knowledge of Comey's thinking says that while Comey was, quote, disturbed by his interactions with President Trump, Comey believed he had the situation under control. The source says if Comey believed at the time that any specific encounter constituted obstruction of justice, Comey would have done more than just write a memo. But tonight, the source says when Comey testifies next week, he may tell Congress that when all of the comments the president made to him are taken together, along with his firing, they could suggest a more serious pattern. And there are continuing questions about Jared Kushner's mid-December meeting with Russian bank chairman Sergei Gorkov, a man who has close ties to President Vladimir Putin. The White House insists Kushner conducted the meeting in his capacity during the transition. VEB Bank maintains it was part of its, quote, business roadshow. The meeting was arranged after Kushner met with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak in early December at Trump Tower. In St. Petersburg Friday, President Putin defended the talks.
Our ambassador met someone. That's what the ambassador must do. That's his work. He's getting paid for that. He must meet. He must discuss current affairs. He must make agreements.
And Putin attacked Hillary Clinton for blaming her election loss on his country, using this over-the-top analogy.
They decided to say, it's not our fault, it's the Russians' fault. It's like anti-Semitism, to blame the Jews for everything. We all know what this can lead to, nothing good.
Kushner's meetings with Russian officials came as Russia was feeling pressure from the U.S. sanctions imposed after Russia's action in Ukraine. Retired coordinator of sanctions policy Dan Fried is now speaking out about his efforts earlier this year to stop the Trump administration from lifting sanctions against Russia, including those imposed by President Obama in December. Fried retired from the State Department in February and said he contacted lawmakers in an effort to codify the sanctions, something that never happened.
Lifting sanctions without the Russians doing anything as a free gift strikes me now as a bad idea. My colleagues were concerned about this, and so was I at the time.
Press Secretary Sean Spicer continued to refer all questions about the Russia investigation to the White House outside counsel. Spicer also said that Jared Kushner absolutely continues to have the full confidence of the president. Wolf?
All right, Jessica, thanks very much. Jessica Schneider reporting. The White House is clamming up tonight about more than just the Russia probe. Multiple officials refusing to answer a key question. Does the president still believe climate change is a hoax? Let's go to our senior White House correspondent, Jim Acosta. Jim, you and other reporters, you repeatedly pressed for information from the press secretary, Sean Spicer, from the EPA administrator, and you got more pushback. You didn't get answers.
That's right, Wolf. And keep in mind, President Trump, there was a media availability earlier this afternoon. He was asked once again whether he believes climate change is a hoax, whether he believes it's real. He did not answer the question. And so once again, he's left it to his top aides and administration officials. And today it was the EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt's turn to explain what's going on inside the president's head when it comes to this question, and he was struggling to provide some climate cover. I tried at one point during the White House briefing earlier today to press Pruitt on the overwhelming scientific evidence that climate change is happening, and here's what's happened.
Why then is the Arctic ice shelf melting? Why are the sea levels rising? Why are the hottest temperatures in the last decade essentially the hottest temperatures that we've seen on record?
We've actually been in a hiatus since the late 1990s.
Sir, when NASA says that 95% of the experts in this area around the world believe that the Earth is warming, and you are up there throwing out information that says, well, maybe this is being exaggerated and so forth, and you're talking about climate exaggerators, it just seems to a lot of people around the world that you and the president are just denying the reality. And the reality of the situation is that climate change is happening, and it is a significant threat to the planet.
Let me say this, and I've said it in the confirmation process, and I said it yesterday.
The Arctic ice and the sea levels.
We have done a tremendous amount as a country to achieve reductions in CO2. And we have done that through technology and innovation. We will continue to do that. We will continue to stay engaged. We are a part, as you know, of the UNFCCC. And that process encourages voices by subnational groups and by countries across the globe. And we are going to stay engaged and try to work through agreements and achieve outcomes that put America's interest first. This is not a message to anyone in the world that America should be apologetic of its CO2 position. We are actually making tremendous advances. We're just not going to agree to frameworks and agreements that put us at an economic disadvantage and hurt citizens across this country. Yes, sir.
Though, that you're putting your head in the sand, though, Mr. Pruitt. Are they a little worried that you're putting your head in the sand?
Well, there's no evidence of that.
Now, the other unsettling thing that happened later on in the briefing, Wolf, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer was asked about how he was asked earlier this week whether he had talked to the president about this belief that the president apparently has that climate change is a hoax. During that briefing earlier this week, Spicer told reporters that he would come back at some point and provide that answer in the briefing room. So he was pressed on that again today and asked, well, what is the answer? Does the president still believe climate change is a hoax? And Spicer did not have an answer to the question today, Wolf, despite having several days to work on just that one question. And of course, when the press secretary to the president of the United States is struggling to provide answers in the briefing room, then ultimately, undoubtedly, at some point, the questions are going to start to be about the future of the press secretary. And I think that's the problem that Sean Spicer has when he can't answer a basic question like that to reporters, Wolf.
Yeah, they had been asked, as you point out, a few days ago about it. I'll get back to you. They had a few days and didn't get back to the reporters. Jim Acosta, thanks very much for that report. Let's get some more on all of this. Senator Ed Markey is joining us. He's a Democrat on the Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
All right, we got a lot to discuss, but I want to begin with next week's scheduled testimony from the former FBI Director James Comey, scheduled to appear before the Senate Intelligence Committee Thursday morning for the first time since he was fired by President Trump. The White House now is considering invoking executive privilege to block his testimony. Are you worried that the president will prevent Comey from giving a full account of their exchanges?
Yeah, that would actually create a complete mess of this investigation of the potential Russian interference in the American elections. I think that the American people have a right to know whether or not in fact, President Trump asked Jim Comey to pledge his loyalty to Donald Trump, whether or not he asked Comey to let the Flynn investigation go, whether or not he told the president that on 3 separate occasions that the president was not under investigation, because we have to get the answers to those questions. And if the president attempts to invoke executive privilege, that would just continue to raise the question of obstruction of justice, which the very firing of Jim Comey has raised in the minds of the American people.
Senator, would the Senate respect the president's invocation of executive privilege, or will the Senate force the president to go to court, a federal court, and ask that court to block Director Comey from appearing?
Well, I would hope that Democrats and Republicans would put politics aside, put party aside, and put the best interest of our nation front and center, because ultimately the American people are entitled to these issues. And the Senate has prerogatives as well, which the president cannot truncate. So I would hope that Democrats and Republicans will stand strong and insist that Comey testify. And if the president attempts to invoke executive privilege, that the Senate use all of its prerogatives, including going to court, in order to ensure that Comey tells the Senate, and through the Senate, the American people, what happened during that Russian investigation.
Well, Senator, I also want to get your thoughts on the White House punting all Russia-related questions to outside private legal counsel. Listen to Sean Spicer at the White House briefing today.
Can you clarify the nature of the conversations that Jared Kushner had with Russian officials and a banker in December? And what was the date of the meeting with the banker?
I cannot, and as I've mentioned the other day, that we're focused on the president's agenda, and going forward, all questions on these matters will be referred to outside counsel, Mark Hassel.
But how can you not answer questions on it when the president himself tweets about it?
We're focused on his agenda, and going forward, all questions on this matter will be referred to outside counsel.
So what do you think of the White House strategy here, Senator Markey, especially in light of the fact that the president himself continues to frequently tweet, about the Russia probe, calling it a witch hunt?
Well, they want to go dark. They don't want to have to respond. They want private counsel to respond, and then private counsel to say we can't comment. And as a result, the American public won't be able to ask or get the answers to these questions. So again, it's just a further attempt to obfuscate, a further attempt to cover up the information which the American people have a right to know the answer to, including what was the subject material that Jared Kushner actually talked about with the Russian banker. What was the subject material that Jared Kushner talked to Ambassador Kislyak about? The American people right now have a question about the compromise of their election last year, the presidential election, and during the transition period, what was the Trump administration doing? This is just another attempt to kind of sweep it under the rug, hope that time passes, hope that people lose their focus, that the press goes away, that other issues will arise. But it's not going to happen, Mr. President. The pressure is going to continue to mount until you give the American people the answers to these key questions. And every day that you delay is a step closer to a constitutional crisis.
As you know, there's a lot of speculation that the subject of those conversations may have been U.S. sanctions against Russia and lifting those sanctions. The former coordinator for sanctions policy at the State Department says it would be a free gift if the Trump administration were to relieve Russia of those sanctions without receiving anything in return. Do you worry that the Trump administration is going to take that step?
I do worry. I think that, unfortunately, Donald Trump has given signals that he believes that cozy cooperation with Putin is the pathway to a better world. But in Crimea, in the Ukraine, in Syria, in the compromise of the American presidential election in 2016, how many instances do we need to understand that Putin does not care about the values of human rights and of the values which are central to what America stands for? So I am very concerned that if the signal was ever sent from the Trump transition team that sanctions could be relieved without any actions by Russia to improve their own behavior, that would only further embolden Putin to continue to engage in these reckless activities, which in fact are undermining national security for the United States and for the rest of the world.
Very quickly, Senator, what about that report in the Washington Post that the Trump administration is actually moving toward the possibility of returning 2 diplomatic compounds to the Russians, one on the eastern shore of Maryland outside of Washington, one out on Long Island outside of New York? Those compounds, as you know, were confiscated in December in retaliation for Russian election meddling. What message would that send? Because you know the Russians, they really want those 2 compounds back.
Again, it's a signal to the Russian government that they're going to get what they want without, in fact, giving the United States what it needs. And that is just not acceptable. It is, again, almost like his decision to back out of the Paris Climate Accord, a presidential indifference to the role that the United States must play on these critical global issues to provide leadership for the entire planet. Giving back those diplomatic residences without a change in behavior by the Russians would be another historic mistake.
All right, Senator, stand by. There's more we need to discuss. There are other developments unfolding even as we speak. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back.